Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Laura, and today's episode is on resilience. And I find that with the levels of burnout these days, the mental health challenges that people are facing at work, there's this need. There's this need for people to develop greater resilience. Resilience is how we can get through the difficult times. When we're resilient, we have more reserves. We have the ability to bounce back quicker from setbacks and to maintain a positive outlook despite the curveballs of life. And MH, the guest that we'll be speaking with today, has a lot of expertise around resilience. And I think that what she shares is going to benefit you no matter who you are, whether you're a teen, whether you're an adult, whether you're in the professional workforce, whether you're at home, wherever you are. We have this concept of building resilience, and that looks different for each and every person. How we go about creating a resilience plan that works for us, and how we stay ahead of our mental well-being and stay on top of feeling great and being able to perform at our best in a difficult, fast-paced, and overloaded world. So I hope that you find this episode as beneficial as I did and that it helps you with your own resilience. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Where Work Meets Life. I'm really excited today to be here with a fellow psychologist who specializes in workplace, and her name is Dr. Marie-Hélène Pelletier, and we will call her MH for simplicity. And our episode today is on the resilience plan, optimizing your work performance and mental health, a very timely topic in today's day and age with a lot of people struggling with high levels of stress and burnout. I'm just thrilled to bring you some guidance and practical advice from Dr. Pelletier, who has really focused her career on business management and psychology and really tackles the crucial issues of leadership resilience and work performance. She has a widespread background, and what I really like about MH is she brings a lot of corporate and industry experience to her work. So she's worked across corporate, insurance, governance, and public sectors, and she brings an international perspective as well. She lives in Vancouver now, originally from Quebec, so really is a true Canadian who's lived in different parts of the country. She has 20 years of experience and holds both a PhD and an MBA from the University of British Columbia, where I'm going tomorrow to move my son out of his residence after completing first year. And I'm just really excited to bring a conversation to you today about Marie-Hélène's new book, which just came out recently, The Resilience Plan. So I'm holding it up for those of you watching on YouTube, a strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health. And this came out in 2024. And in addition, MH has presented and co-authored numerous publications in both industry and academic outlets. So welcome to Where Work Meets Life, MH.
Oh, Dr. Laura, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So tell us what led you to focus on building resilience.
A number of things. It's in part my experience, in part my fascination with the research showing the opportunity that it represents to build that ability to go through adversity and come out even stronger in a very proactive way, and I would argue strategic way. And it's also an approach, whether they use the word resilience or not. I mostly work with professionals and leaders, and they are looking really to meet challenges all day, every day. They love that. We love that. You're like this, I'm like this as well. And in order to do this, we need to have that resilience, that ability to go through these demands, learn from them, and come out even stronger. So, combination of different forces brought me there.
Awesome. So tell me a little more about your book. What inspired you to write this book at this time in your life?
In working with my clients in executive coaching and in my speaking work, where I would hear from time to time and more things like, oh, this is so helpful. I'm so glad I have this moving forward. I wish I knew this earlier. And then I wish I knew this earlier came a few times. And at some point I thought, Well, yes, I agree. And therefore, if I wrote it in a book, it could get in more hands sooner, including early career. You mentioned your son that just finished his first year. That's wonderful, very exciting. And at some point, he'll be early career. And the sooner this approach for our resilience can be eh, within how we think about things, the better. And so, bringing in the book psychology and strategy was really a way to bring the best practice and the research we have from psychology to the minds of people who are either in business themselves or professionals who will get these concepts very quickly, to speak a language that just goes quickly, works, and then we can just apply it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's your strength from your business background and your MBA is putting the business lingo into into the terms about well-being. So taking the soft stuff and putting more business labels onto it. It's a very unique way of approaching it that I think must really resonate with people. It did for me.
No, thanks for saying this. It's yes, I've been called a translator in some ways, so bringing to people in business or in other professions the things that psychologists know, but that these other professionals very much need, but don't necessarily have at their fingertips. And because they are so busy, yes, you do need to translate and bring it so that it can be, digested and implemented as quickly as possible.
And I know from my own career, like sometimes we use too much psychobabble and psychological jargon, and we just need plain language, don't we?
And it's interesting you say this because and we find it interesting and everybody else would also if they had time to read all this. But that's very much also part of my own experience writing the book. There were a number of chapters, big sections of chapters where I was sharing fascinating things. And then I'd be brought back by those who were overseeing my work saying, is this going to get your reader from point A to point B? And if the answer was no, poop, it's out. And that's how it was able to stay very focused on what does the reader need to move from point A to point B.
Yeah, and I love that about it. It doesn't, it's a book that's not overwhelming. I mean, the size of it and the feel of it, it's a book that it won't overwhelm you to get through it. And it's also very practical, is my read of it. How has it impacted people so far? What have you heard?
Yes, well, I'm hearing a lot of validation that the intention that I was putting in it is what is coming out. I've very much designed it so that you could, if you had a flight that crosses the continent, you could get it at the beginning of the flight. It would fit in your carry-on because it's small, and you would get out with your plan. But yeah, no, the feedback is goes from it's as if it's speaking to me directly to she understands my situation exactly to I need to buy copies for my entire team. Or, oh yeah, I've also had someone saying through 3 generations of the same family. So, because different people need it. So it's being shared. It was at some point one of the most gifted books on Amazon. That was so cool. So yes, it's making its way.
That is so cool. And I will get my 18-year-old son to read it. He loves reading business-oriented books, and I think this one and psychology. So I will get this to him.
Yes, and they have it at UBC Bookstore. That's one of the places where university bookstores is one of the places where I very much wanted it to be exactly for that reason.
Perfect. So let's talk about what's going on in the workforce today. I'm seeing a lot of trends, but I'm going to let you answer this rather than me. What are you seeing when it comes to mental health and burnout in particular?
So, in general, there are some things that are probably true to various degrees, but still true for everyone over the world. And I know people over the world listen to your podcast. It does differ a bit by country in terms of how much attention employers are paying to burnout or to mental health in the workplace. So, probably a bit more in Canada than in the US, growing into the US, probably less in France than in Canada or the US. And so it varies, right, in different countries. But we are talking more about it definitely post-COVID, in part just because of having gone through this. But we are also going through even more demands, specific demands in the work we do, but also chronic demands that we're all facing. Pandemic was one, AI coming into our lives even more is one of the next ones, current slash next. And so all these demands, and there are others, are at some point taking a toll. So if we're used to just putting our head down and, almost like, turning a blind eye to everything else that's happening, keeping going, some people will call it grit, persistence, whatever. You get to a point where you can't override your mental health. You can't just assume you're going to be resilient because you've always been or it's in you. It's not a personality trait. And so, therefore, people become at risk. And we are seeing the burnout rates increasing. In Canada, healthcare is higher than 60%. And so it's having a serious impact.
So when you say higher than 60%, can you be a little more specific for us? What is that about?
I'm just thinking about one particular study I was looking at where nurses were reporting rates of burnout as high as 60%. So in different workplaces, it will look differently. And that varies for all kinds of reasons still. Another way sometimes, because burnout is not a diagnosis, right? So if someone was looking, say, at their, in Canada, their disability absence rates, there will be physical and psychological, and burnout is not a diagnosis. So if it is impacting someone, it would be impacting their health either on the physical side or the mental health side with depression or anxiety. So you would see these rates increase as well. So in some organizations, the rate of mental health disability are higher than 60%. In many organizations, it's lower, 30%, but then in some, it's higher than 60.
Yeah, and that's a huge concern, especially for industries where we are reliant on the industry for our state of livelihood, like healthcare, education. And I'm seeing a lot of high rates of stress in teachers and in healthcare professionals that concern me as a citizen, wanting these people to be healthy and appreciated.
Yes, and we see it in these individuals, and there's studies there, and we see it obviously in just in organizations. But we also see burnout rates going into all professions, not just the professions where people are taking care of other people, like education and healthcare, for example. Especially with the pandemic, leaders, for example, have been encouraged to turn even more towards people on their teams, check in with them, see how they're doing, and that kind of thing, which is wonderful. And it's also representing an additional demand for the leaders. And so that's also adding up.
Wow. Okay. I can totally see that. And one of my questions was about leaders in particular. So are you hearing and reading about higher rates of burnout in leaders these days?
Well, the rates of burnout in leaders is less studied than the rates of burnouts in other people. It's as if the academic literature has a bit gone with the dominant discourse in some ways, not supported it, but just by default. I don't know exactly why, but the point is, has assumed that leaders were going to be fine no matter what, kind of thing. So the focus on them has escaped a lot of the research. There is more and more research on them and how they're doing, but it's more recent research. And the reality is that they are facing very significant demands and will be facing even more new demands that will require even more agility from them with AI, because with AI, team members will be AI. Some of them will not be humans. And so, how do we do this? How do we manage, plan, stay ethical? Lots of demands, lots of ways of managing this as well if we are proactive.
And if we fill our own energy reserves, and I think you used the words supply and demand. So I'm going to skip to that question. I love the concept of supply and demand with building resilience. So can you describe that to us, MH?
Yes. Let me tell you first why I even went to this. Other than we hear these words, I'm using them slightly differently than how we use them, say, in economics. But part of what happens when leaders and professionals get to a point where their resilience is sliding down is they wonder why it is. They were like, I've been resilient all my life. I've gone through even bigger things than what I'm going through right now. What's my problem? Everything is the same. What's my problem? And it's as if they have, and it's been, I say they, at some points, it's been me too. Um, in order to push ourselves, start a new company, take an even more challenging role, whatever it is that the challenges that we love, we've had to some degree, have a bit of a positive bias, right? Disregard the size of demands we're facing, how much they may impact us, because we had to keep going. So it was adaptive, it was good, it pushed us forward. But then if we keep doing this, there will be a point at which it's just not realistic. We're now not seeing the reality with just good visibility. And so what I'm saying is, all right, let's step back, make sure we have clarity on your sources of demands right now and your sources of supply. Two columns, table, fairly straightforward. But then usually what happens is people will list two or three things on the demand side, three things that are challenging at work right now that they would rather not have to deal with. That's great. And then I say, okay, keep going. What else is going on at work? Even things we want, right? Even the last promotion, which is, say, very positive. Me launching a book, very positive. It's a work demand still. It's requiring a lot of energy. And then people will sometimes say, that, well, that's it. And I say, well, how about on the personal side? Same thing. There may be things that we don't really want, but they are demands. They may be things we really want, but they're also demands. And so then people develop a much more better informed perspective on the demands that they're facing. And then same thing, we tend to over report to ourselves on the supply, tend to think, oh yes, I exercise 3 to 5 times a week. And I say, okay, how about past 2 weeks? And they say, well, past 2 weeks have been exceptionally busy. So no, not the past 2 weeks, but in general, yes. Well, then that means it's not going on the list. And so then they start seeing the disconnect and the need to take action.
I think that's wonderful, and just seeing it on two columns and seeing all the demands on our plate that we might not even think about. And for me, I run my own business. I have the podcast, the speaking, the writing, the research. Much like you in a lot of ways, MH, I think we have a lot in common. But I tend to have a servant's heart, and I get involved in charities. So the last 2 years, I've been involved in 2 charities a year, and I find that it's too much at the same time. So I love the fund development and the raising awareness for a cause, but I think it's just like too many demands on a good thing at once.
It could be. It could be. And it's a great example because I think this is exactly what happens. You get to a point in your career where these opportunities to do all of these things that all talk to you, they're connected with your values you've built towards this, and they're here now. That's amazing. At the same time, yes, it can be at a point just too much. And a great concept that one of the researchers in the US has developed, just boundaried generosity. Right? So that concept where, okay, yes, we want to keep that generosity, giving some of your time and all, but at the same time, maybe it's time to step back and create a bit more of a boundary there so that it's still connected to what you want, to your values, your giving, yes. And you're also having even more visibility on all your other demands, all your other values, where else you want to invest time and energy at this point, and may need more boundaries. Yeah.
Boundary generosity. I'm going to use that term. I love that term for me and for clients, right? Because you're right. The further ahead you get in your career, the more opportunities come up and the more people want something from you. And I think that being generous with your time is great, but setting the boundaries is very important for your own self-care.
Yeah.
Let's talk about risks here. So there's these concepts you have about how to build resilience, but what are the top risks that get in the way for busy, overloaded, high achiever type people in doing so? What are you hearing?
There's a few. One is what I was mentioning earlier, that tendency to just minimize the demands that they're facing. So therefore, if I minimize the demands I'm facing, I think I'm fine. And so that I will be fine, basically, right? Or another one could be to just assume that this is who we are. That's a personality trait. And it's easy to assume for a number of reasons, right? We've done tough things, demanding things before and gone through. So, and yes, that probably was at a time of high resilience. So that's great. Then you may have had people around you that tell you, oh, you're so resilient. We can give you anything and it always works. And then they'll start calling you, oh, you're the rock of the team, the rock of the family. And so you get to a point where you buy it. You associate with that. It feels like it's an identity. And and that's a trap because we actually know from research, resilience is not a personality trait, it's a state. It does connect to some personality traits like optimism, but even then, it's a state. So there will be moments where, even if in general you tend to be optimistic, there will be moments where your resilience may be higher or lower, and you can influence it to bring it up. So, not a personality trait either. And then also sometimes people will be just so busy with the daily demands, the operations, life, all the demands, that they'll just say, "Well, I will just cross the river when I get there," and just leave it to leave it to fate. And oh, we can actually take a very proactive role because it is a state, and if we will do that if we recognize all the demands we're facing.
That's wonderful. And I saw a therapist at one time who gave me the analogy of how, yeah, I was driving really fast down a highway, and the faster you drive, the harder you'll crash if you go off the side of the road. So if there's a something that happens and stuff, an unexpected curveball, if you're going too fast, it's dangerous because you can't slow down and address it. You don't have enough space. Does that concept resonate with what you see?
That's it's a good concept. It reminds me of another one too that it's also a motorized vehicle analogy, but it's the fighter jet pilots and how they have to look at both what's happening right here, so they don't touch the ground with the aircraft, but also keep looking at what's ahead. And so that sort of looking at what's here, looking at what's there, also really fits with that need to be able to step back and be strategic about what's going on and very aware of the context, in this case, the environment. Mhm.
That is a great analogy. Thank you. So let's talk about the quadrants of context in your book. Why is this an important concept? And please give us an example.
Yes. So, what I've done in the book is knowing how my reader is, I like you and I, Laura, just very, life is very full and often overflowing. So, we don't have a lot of time. And we need to get as quickly as possible to a better clarity on our context. So, one of the exercises I encourage people to do and show, again, it's all very simple. You could do this in 15 minutes, 1 5. It's using the same thing we do in business, a SWOT analysis that we would do, but for us here as individuals. And here's the reason why. Sometimes people would come to me and say, well, again, I've been resilient before. What's my problem now? Why should I do anything different? Okay. Then I would say, wait a second. If we were in business here and we're looking to launch a new product or a new service, would we just have a great idea and go? Or would we have a great idea and then look at what's going on? Who else is offering this? How much are they charging for it? Who's buying it? What forces in the future could impact the sales of this thing? We would do all this and then we would build a strategic plan. So, same thing here. We can't just say, oh, yeah, resilience, exercise more, eat better, do volunteer work, go in nature, all the things we hear. And they're true, they're all research based. We need this to connect with the reality of our context. And so if we do a SWOT analysis, the equivalent of that, so we look at internally, what are the areas that are internal to me that naturally make it easy to focus on resilience. Let's say I believe in it. I know I truly believe in it. Okay. What's an area of challenge internally? I tend to say yes to a lot of interesting things, and that becomes too much. Okay. Areas of that helps me externally. Okay, well, maybe the person lives in a context where they can actually step out the door and go for a walk right there. No need to get in a car or something like this. And something that may be actually challenging externally, maybe that there are financial pressures right now in their family or in their personal lives. So, see, but now we have a better idea of what's going on that's informing the reality of my context right now, which then will allow me to create a plan that is not aspirational or just in theory. It will be My plan, my MH plan will be different from Dr. Laura's plan, which will be different from Steve's plan and anybody else, and even different from your plan in 6 months because context changes.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So it's a really an exercise that you could do periodically, and you should do periodically. Which brings me to for the strategic resilience plan that you give people the tools to create. How often should they create something like this, and how can someone start it? Like, what's the process of getting started?
In terms of how often, I would say let's go back to in business. How often would you update your strategy? It depends, right? If this strategy is still, you're still implementing it and it's still working, that we keep going. At some point it's going to feel like it needs to change. The context has changed. We've now implemented all the tactics we had outlined. We're ready for an update. So sometimes it's 3 months, 6 months, once a year. It depends. And so it's the same for us here. Like, say for me, for example, I tried to apply my own plan. So I had a plan that took me through the book launch phase. Then I found myself, so there was the pre-launch, during launch, and after. Then I'm 2 months after, and I'm still using the same strategies. And I'm like, what? Something's off. Like, it's not working exactly. It's not, doesn't feel like. And then I realize, oh, it's because I need to update the plan. The context is now different. So, so you want to do that. So the way you do what I'm proposing in the book is you start with your own values. A lot of leaders have at some point explored what their values are on their own with their coach in their 360 conversations. It's been there. But for right now, let's revisit, make sure you put them in writing, just easier to take distance and think. Then we've talked about that supply and demand table so that we really have good clarity. Then that SWOT analysis. And then my recommendation to keep things simple again is, yeah, create the 3 pillars that you're going to focus on based on what you have here. And sometimes it will appear in a fairly clear way. Sometimes it's a conversation. I work with people sometimes to do theirs. If they say, I only have 1 hour, I can't even listen to the 5 hour audiobook or skim through this. So let's just do a session instead. Yes, we could do that. Um, but the reality is that, yeah, you go and identify your pillars and your actions. So sometimes someone, for example, who identified in their values that, let's say, family is there. Let's say there are supply and demand. They realize that demands list is through the roof and there's very little on the supply side. They've looked at their context. Well, it may be that one of their pillars will be to assess time better. And then one of their actions will be to write on a post-it when they think something's going to be 15 minutes, write how long it actually was so that they can adjust, because we tend to underestimate how long things are. That's why we're cutting it short at appointment, meeting someone a little late because we left too quick, with too little time. So that may be one of their pillars. Another pillar may be boundaries, so that when they work from home and someone from the family comes to their office, their behavior will be to stand up instead of talking from the chair still in front of their computer. See, this takes no additional time. It's just a concrete action that now connects with my values, and that starts shifting things. But it will be different for each of us.
Oh, beautiful. So, really tailored and customized to the person's life and what they have at their disposal that can actually be realistic.
Yes.
And how do people go about keeping this alive? So, once they create this strategic resilience plan, how do you remember to follow it?
That sometimes is part of the plan. Sometimes, because for some people, it will depend what the thing is. Like, let's say for some people, it's let's say they had a pillar, which is the case for a lot of professionals and leaders, called meditation. So they know the research, they value it, but they've been more on, say, active recovery, running, walking, cycling, whatever, but not meditation yet, right? So maybe the pillar is going to be that. And maybe part of the actions is to make sure they have a meditation reminder somewhere, whether it's a priming image, an image that reminds them of doing their meditation, or having a nice place cushion where they will do their meditation visible to them using choice architecture. That could be one of the ways. So sometimes that you have to build it in. For others, it's naturally something they want to do. Um, and then you implement it. And it's interesting. I had someone who, in the process of writing the book, she was part of one of the focus groups testing the concepts of the book. And so she did her plan, and a few months later invited me to speak to both to her and her team of leaders. So went there, provided the workshop. She was there sitting at the back thinking she would just listen this time. She came to me at the end so excited, because what she realized is the plan she had done 3 months ago had now been implemented, and she was benefiting from these things, and she was ready for the update for her plan. And that's what she used this workshop for.
That is just so great. So it's something you need to keep fresh, you need to keep alive, and not be hesitant to update it to keep it fresh. Just like doing different sorts of activities keeps your interest up, right? Rather than the same thing all the time. So I get the sense having some variety on the plan is important.
For some people, it will be. And then for sometimes, it really will depend. Say, for example, someone who travels a lot for their work, it may be that the plan is mostly about clarifying when they travel, what versions of what do they do when they're at home need to be, how do they need to be modified. So instead of, oh, I'm traveling, I don't do any of these things, I feel bad that I'm not, I beat myself up for not doing these things and not being consistent. No, I have a different plan for when I travel, and I'm following it because it's now realistic.
Beautiful. Thank you. Really, really good ideas here, really good examples, MH. So I want to ask you a couple of questions about you to share with our guests. One is, what do you read or listen to for your own growth and development? I'm sure that there's a lot, but what's something that comes to mind that might be useful for the listeners?
One of the things I read research a lot, all day, every day. I love it. I just enjoy that. And so for me personally, then when I'm reading outside of that, it needs to take me somewhere else. And one of the authors I really love, and that's, when I travel, I often bring one of her smaller versions of her books. So her name is Sarah Markey, Marquis, Markey. And she is a National Geographic explorer. But when I started reading her books, she was not. She was an explorer. And then as she kept going, she reached that level. The woman has walked on her own 3 years from Siberia, how do you pronounce it? Siberia in French.
Siberia?
Yes. To Australia. So on her own, 3 years of her life doing this. And she's done other things like this, like crossing the entire South America. Amazing, just amazing. So that's one of the books and she has many books, actually, some in French, some both French and English, and even other languages.
Awesome. And speaking of the outdoors, I understand you're an outdoor adventurer.
Yes, I am. Yes. And some of my adventures are in Alberta. So there you go.
So you like our mountains here?
I do. I love our mountains here too. Mountains anywhere.
Beautiful. Do you listen to any podcasts that intrigue you?
Not one in particular. I enjoy, sometimes I'm looking for specific guest conversations. And so that's usually what's going to bring me to a particular podcast. But for me, podcast is almost like work reading, and different from how other people will consume podcasts. I actually, if I'm going for a walk or outdoors activities, I don't listen to podcasts while I do it, because I want to just be in that moment and let the brain do nothing. So no music, no podcast, no nothing. Be just alone with my brain and smelling the flowers, which right now in Vancouver are amazing.
Oh, I can't wait. I love your cherry blossoms out there.
They're there.
Nice. What would you do if you didn't need to sleep and could use that time for whatever else you wanted, MH?
I think I would just learn new things just for the sake of it. I just enjoy that, like probably you and so many people. And so that's how I would use the time. Just learn additional things, all kinds of things, personal, professional, possibly do another degree. Why not? But yeah, that's how I think I would use the time.
Wonderful. And my final question, if you could have one wish for a better world when it comes to resilience, what would it be?
It would be for more people. Well, if it's a wish, I'll say everybody to think more strategically, talk more strategically, and act more strategically about their resilience. Because if we do that, um, things will change, and that will be wonderful.
Awesome. And I couldn't agree more. I think that the work you've put out there into the world, this beautiful book, The Resilience Plan, I think it is going to continue to help a lot of people to develop their resilience, which is something that is a work in progress for all of us and needs attention and nurturing.
Yes, exactly.
So thank you for all you do, MH. Thank you for this wonderful interview. We'll share the links to the book in the show notes and in my monthly e-newsletter. And we are just delighted to have had you on Where Work Meets Life.
Same. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Take care. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Where Work Meets Life. If you found this content valuable, please rate and review the episode and share with others who may benefit. Visit me on my website at drlaura.live and sign up for my monthly e-newsletter full of tips and resources. I'm also a passionate keynote speaker and would be delighted to speak with you on your speaking needs. Stay well.